All right, y'all, here we go. Here we go. I feel like stuff like this happens all the time. You have a big story, big breaking news story that blows up, and it's a criticism of one side, and then like 7.5 minutes later, it's like, oops, the other side is just as guilty of the same thing. So let's go through all the specifics, and I want you guys to determine, whether or not you think this is perfectly analogous, what the punishment should be for Trump versus Biden, but obviously I'm burying the lead here. There were classified documents that were found at a Joe Biden office. Okay, so CBS News says, U.S. Attorney reviewing documents marked classified from Joe Biden's vice presidency found at Biden think tank. Attorney General Merrick Garland has assigned the U.S. Attorney in Chicago to review documents marked classified that were found at the Penn Biden Center for Diplomacy and Global Engagement in Washington. Two sources with knowledge of the inquiry told CBS News. The roughly 10 documents are from President Biden's vice presidential office at the center, the sources said. CBS News has learned the FBI is also involved in the U.S. Attorney's inquiry. The material was identified by personal attorneys for Mr. Biden on November 2nd, just before the midterm elections. Richard Sauber, special counsel to the president, confirmed the documents were discovered when Mr. Biden's personal attorneys, quote, were packing files housed in a locked closet to prepare to vacate office space at the Penn Biden Center in Washington, D.C., Sauber said in a statement to CBS News. The documents were contained in a folder that was in a box with other unclassified papers, the sources said. The sources revealed neither what the documents contain nor their level of classification. A source familiar with the matter told CBS News the documents did not contain nuclear secrets. Did not contain nuclear secrets. Okay, so a few things. Trump's documents did contain nuclear secrets, and we happen to know at this point that some of Trump's documents weren't just classified, weren't just top secret. They were basically like the top secret of the top secret, and they were held in what's called a SCIF, which is like a private room that nobody can really enter unless they have the proper credentials to get in. And even within that room, it was under lock and key. So just some baseline facts that we're getting out of the way here in order to continue discussing the details of this. Sauber also said that on the same day the material was discovered, November 2nd, the White House counsel's office notified the National Archives, which took possession of the materials the following morning. Okay, so again, another important fact. Basically, they were looking through this closet, they found this stuff, it was classified material. They're not saying what level of classification, but it was one level or another of classified. And as soon as they realized what they had, they immediately got in contact with the National Archives. They immediately got in contact with law enforcement officials, and they said, hey, we found these. What's the proper process? We're going to go ahead and turn them over. Okay, continuing. Quote, the discovery of these documents was made by the president's attorneys, Sauber said. The documents were not the subject of any previous request or inquiry by the archives. Since that discovery, the president's personal attorneys have cooperated with the archives and the Department of Justice in a process to ensure that any Obama-Biden administration records are appropriately in the possession of the National Archives. A source familiar with the matter said representatives from the National Archives then notified the Justice Department. Garland assigned U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois, John Lausch, to find out how the material marked classified ended up at the Penn Biden Center. The review is considered a preliminary step, and the Attorney General will determine whether further investigation is necessary, including potentially appointing a special counsel. Lausch was nominated to be U.S. Attorney by former President Donald Trump, and he's one of the only two current Trump-era U.S. attorneys still serving. The other is Delaware U.S. Attorney David Weiss, who's leading an investigation into the president's son, Hunter Biden. Okay, so this is actually interesting. It's almost like Merrick Garland and the U.S. government is going out of their way to seem impartial by even appointing somebody on this case that was appointed by Donald Trump. So in other words, I think what the goal here is that if this guy eventually clears Biden, they'll be able to say, hey, look, it was one of Trump's guys that even cleared him. So like, what do you guys have to complain about? But I have news for Merrick Garland. I have news for anybody who would fall for this delusion. Republicans are not going to care. They're not going to care. Even they're going to say, that guy was co-opted. That guy was corrupted. That guy's a sellout. That guy is not, really a Trump person. Because all that's going to happen is certain people are going to read the headlines and they're going to go, oh, that's it. Wash your hands of it. They were guilty of the exact same thing. No further questions asked. Because again, we live in a gotcha culture, right? Like our political scene, the political sphere in this country is all about like, let me score some cheap points in the most surface level way possible and just run that narrative into the ground. And so, I'm not expecting this fact to land on anybody who's, on the right or hardcore Republican or massively pro-Trump, they're not going to like sit for a second and go, oh, that's interesting. So a Trump attorney is going to go after Biden on this. Lausch recently briefed the Attorney General and will eventually submit a final report to Garland. The review is expected to conclude soon. The Penn Biden Center is a think tank about a mile from the White House in Washington, D.C. that is affiliated with the University of Pennsylvania and named for the sitting president. The Presidential Records Act requires all presidential and vice presidential documents to be turned over to the National Archives. There are special protocols to keep classified information secure. Mr. Biden learned about the presence of the documents when his lawyer reported them to the White House counsel's office in November. A source familiar said the president is unaware of their contents. The documents are believed to be currently held in a secure location in Washington. Lausch's review will examine in part how the documents got from Mr. Biden's vice presidential office to the Penn Biden Center. The Penn Biden Center and the University of Pennsylvania did not respond to a request for comment. The National Archives declined to comment. Attorneys assigned to oversee Biden's vice presidential records, Robert Leonard, James Garland, and Dana Remus, did not reply to voice messages and an email seeking comment. The Justice Department and FBI declined to comment. A source familiar said the Office of the Director of National Intelligence is aware of the Justice Department inquiry. The ODNI also declined to comment. Former President Donald Trump commented on the CBS News story Monday night, asking on his Truth Social app, when is the FBI going to raid the many homes of Joe Biden, perhaps even the White House? These documents were definitely not declassified. Okay, so that's hilarious. Trump, of course, if he was trying to be logically consistent, what he would say is, hey man, he did nothing wrong, because I don't think I did anything wrong, so he did nothing wrong. But Trump doesn't care about logical consistency. He's just a partisan hack. Everything they do is wrong and bad, full stop. Everything I do is pure and good and the best in the world. End of story, right? But he doesn't, he doesn't think it through. He's like a dog. It's like a Pavlovian response. It's like, bad, Joe Biden, bad. Couldn't believe he did this, bad. Now, again, there are some important distinctions here. And I'm going to get to an interesting video in a second of somebody who you wouldn't expect to defend Biden, actually defending Biden on this. But the Biden team immediately reached out to the authorities and were cooperating. The Trump team, it was the exact opposite. He was like pretending he gave up all the documents, but he didn't give up all the documents. He was lying to people, including his own attorneys. So, I mean, obviously there's a difference there, right? It's the same thing. Here, let me make an analogy. It's like if you haven't paid taxes in 5 years, right? If you go and actively walk into the IRS building and you're upfront with them, you tell them, hey man, here's the deal. This is what happened. I didn't pay the taxes. I'm here because I want to own up to it. I want to make a deal with you. I want to pay these taxes. They'll make a deal with you. But if you don't pay, and then you keep not paying, and then you start dodging them and avoiding them and hiding from it, well, then you might end up in jail. Whereas again, with this instance, he's like, oh, okay, we have these classified documents, turn them over immediately. Okay. So I think we have one more quote here. This is from GOP House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, called the recovery of the documents with classified markings from Mr. Biden's time as vice president, quote, very concerning. He added, he's had these classified documents, and what has he said about the other president with classified documents? Asked if this instance is different because attorneys found them and immediately handed the material over, McCarthy replied, oh, really? They just now found them after all those years? Again, so he's saying, where's your logical consistency? Well, I would just flip that question right back on him. Where's your logical consistency? If you were downplaying it under Trump, why wouldn't you downplay it now? Especially given that the facts, actually make the situation far more complex and nuanced this time around. But he doesn't care about logical consistency. Here, you wanna know what logical consistency sounds like? I'll show you it. They should thoroughly investigate what's going on with Trump. They should make a determination, and they should charge him or not. I think it would make the most sense if they charged him, especially since he was trying to hide from this as much as possible, and he was dodging accountability, and this is one of like 47 different crimes he's committed. When it comes to Biden, exact same set of facts. I think they should thoroughly investigate this. They should make a determination based on the law, based on intent, whether or not he committed a crime, and then if indeed he did, and they can prove that through an investigation, by all means, prosecute him. Throw him in jail right next to Trump. But if they determine, hey, there are mitigating factors here and there's too much nuance and they were cooperating and it was only 10 documents versus hundreds of documents, etc., so we're not going to go after Biden, then it's like, okay. But look, again, we live in such a polarized environment. You're going to have some people look at the headlines for both scenarios and go, oh, it's the exact same. So now if you don't go after Biden and you go after Trump, it's obviously just because of rank partisan bias, even though, as I just described to you, is it's somebody appointed by Trump who's looking into this Biden case. Okay, so now your mind's going to be blown. You ready for this? So this is Fox News. Karl Rove, who of course was part of the Bush administration, hardcore right-wing Republican, I would go as far as to say an extremist. He goes on Fox News and he sort of burst their bubble a little bit. Watch this.
Let's bring in Karl Rove because, well, sounds a little similar, Karl.
Well, there are differences, but you can't make this stuff up. But there are differences. For example, how many documents? In Biden's case, there appear to be about 10. In the case of President Trump, hundreds. How did they get there? We don't yet know how the documents got to the Biden office connected with his activities on behalf of the University of Pennsylvania. We know that President Trump ordered the removal of the documents to Mar-a-Lago.
So let me just stop there. This is surprising. Because again, the details of the case matter, right? Like the specifics, that's where the devil's always in the details, like that old saying goes. Here's Karl Rove apparently actually bothered to read the articles and not just the headlines. And he's like, okay, you got 10 documents here, you got hundreds of documents here, you got listening to the authorities here, you got not listening to the authorities here. You have, we don't know how they got there versus Trump ordered it. Look, you can't, it's honesty, right? He's being honest.
How responsive were they when the Biden people found out about it? They immediately called the appropriate authorities and turned them over. We spent a year and a half watching the drama unfold in Mar-a-Lago, and it had to end in a police search to recover the documents. But still, despite the differences, this is going to create lots of headaches for the Department of Justice in deciding how to handle President Trump's issues, because now they have an issue that, at least in the minds of a lot of ordinary Americans, are going to be conflated as being roughly the same.
Yep.
That's why I think they did a smart thing in turning this over to the U.S. attorney in Chicago to look at initially, because that's one of the two remaining Trump-appointed U.S. attorneys left in the Justice Department. That and the Delaware U.S. attorney who's looking into Hunter Biden. But this strikes me as being very problematic for the Biden justice.
So look, I think that's all a fair breakdown. I think that's all fair. And understand something, guys. So they're going to do the investigation. In the same way I gave you all the nuance and the complexity up front here, the specifics of this story and how it compares to the Trump story, it may happen that in the course of this investigation, we learn something that's damning, right? Like, it's very possible they find out, hey, some of the documents that Biden had were also the top secret of the top secret. You need to view it in a SCIF and it's still under lock and key. And this is stuff that should never be anywhere outside of, hardcore protection. Well, if that's the case, then obviously my opinion is going to be, hey, maybe there should be legal consequences for this, because it's wrong when Trump does it. It's wrong when Biden does it. Even though you could say the intent might be different with both of them, I still think it's a fair point to say, hey, crack down on that. That can't be allowed. So again, the specifics matter. So the investigation is going to matter. Like when we learn exactly what went on here, and if we learn, for example, that Biden ordered, hey, you got to take these out again, well, then in that scenario, it's like, throw the book at him, right? But if we learn that that's not the case, if we learn that Biden didn't order it and the stuff that was classified wasn't the top secret classified, it was like the lowest level of classification, then that's a different story. So the specifics are going to matter. The details are going to matter. And look, it matters in both cases. I do think up front, though, when you get, all of the information, it's very clear that in the case of Trump, at face value, it's a lot worse. And that's something even Karl Rove is willing to admit. And he just went through the reason why that is. So either way, I do think it's fair to say this is super awkward. And it's such a common, in politics, this is so common. Like, you had Democrats attack Republicans nonstop, year in, year out, for their, they want to build the wall thing. And it's like, okay, that's racist, that's bigoted, that's stupid, that's idiotic, well, whatever. And then, of course, in the case of Joe Biden, there's a video of him in like the 1990s giving a speech. And he says, like, we need to build some sort of a barrier or a fence. And it's like, okay, it just, again, to stick with the issue of immigration, this just happened on that issue too, because Title 42, this was in place under Trump. It's the pandemic era policy where there's no due process for immigrants that come into this country. You just kick them right out because you say, hey, there's an emergency. You don't get due process. You kick them out. Biden had it in place before. For a while there, it looked like they were getting rid of it because, courts ruled, hey, you can't have it. Now looks like the highest court ruled, no, you can have it. And this is still law of the land. And now Biden's enforcing it again. So all that that bloviating and that bluster about how he's antithetical to American values with how he treats people. Well, now he's doing the exact same thing, right? And so, unfortunately, there are so many issues where it's like this. The Iraq War, it was a bipartisan affair. Of course, it was led by Republicans, but Democrats went along with it, including Joe Biden, including Hillary Clinton. And look, I mean, I think I speak for a lot of people when I say, I wish there was a different option. I wish there was somebody who was not for NAFTA, not for deregulating Wall Street, not for the Iraq War, not comically barbaric on the issue of the border. Now, I'm not saying I don't believe in a border. Of course, I think it's fair for a nation to have a border. Many nations have, nations almost by definition have borders. Of course, it's okay to do border protection. The question is, in the specifics of it, how do you adjudicate who can stay, who can't stay? What kind of a process do you have in place? Is it humane? Is it ethical, etc.? And far too often, it looks like, even though there are differences between the two parties and between individual politicians, that just the differences are not as much as you and I hope. And that's a sad, sad, unfortunate reality. If you want to see me and Crystal Ball interview legends like Noam Chomsky, Cornel West, and more, subscribe to Crystal, Kyle, and Friends on Substack. $5 a month gets you the video version a day early. Remember, we take 0 ad dollars for this podcast. Or you can sign up on Substack for free and get the audio version a day later. Link in the video description box below.